The year was 1877. Only a decade since the end of slavery, Mississippi was a battleground. The Ku Klux Klan torched black churches, shot into courtrooms, and gunned down judges who dared to grant black citizens justice. Armed patrols prowled the streets, suppressing black voters on Election Day. Amidst this chaos, a child was born into a place called Greasy Row. This was no ordinary town. It was a gritty stretch of lawlessness along the Yazoo River, a red light district filled with saloons, gamblers, prostitutes, and the relentless hum of danger. This was the wild and illicit riverboat world that shaped General Washington, the man who would later rise from the ashes of a broken South to forge his own path, the Supreme Council of the House of Jacob of the United States of America. Born to Munroe and Martha Washington, General's early life was shaped by turmoil. His parents fought constantly. Munroe resented the frequent pregnancies, while Martha accused him of infidelity. Their arguments escalated until separation seemed inevitable, leaving Martha to raise General and his siblings, Holly and Eddie, alone. Young General's childhood was far from idyllic. He endured harsh beatings from his grandmother, punishments so severe they pushed him to run away, finding refuge in the woods. He became a survivalist, living as a homeless boy on the fringes of society. Yet even in those tough times, General's character shone, often going hungry himself. He remembers distributing all of his meager food to other school children who had none, instinctively becoming a leader. He also recalls older children waiting for his arrival, before starting their games or even swimming. Whether these tales were the product of a child's overactive imagination, we may never know. As a young adult, we see General attempt to find his place in the world. What reveals is a youth torn between the lifestyle of the Greasy Row and the first signs of his call to ministry. Known for carrying a straight razor, he and his younger brother Eddie teamed as a pair of gamblers. But during a card game, General recalls being suddenly struck by the hand of God. As told by his biographers, armed with a large shotgun, he routinely sat at the back of a Sunday school class, ensuring the teacher wouldn't stray from the true teachings. Even the local sheriff is said to have warned the townspeople to avoid the well-statured general, most historical accounts putting him well above 6 foot tall. Separating fact from legend is challenging with larger-than-life figures. In 1902, General's uncle Reverend Allen Miller performed marital vows for he and his new wife, Betty. He writes that she was quiet, comforting, and loyal. Together, the couple moved to Chicago, his older sister Holly joining in their exodus north. His younger brother Eddie later relocated to Arkansas. Initially joining a prominent Baptist church, General longed for a church that did more for everyday people. Driven by a hunger for deeper spiritual truth, General Washington left and joined the Israel of God White Horse Army, a holiness church. They licensed him as a minister, and he pastored in Terre Haute, Indiana. While there, he encountered G.T. Haywood, a Jesus-only Pentecostal preacher who introduced him to the controversial practice of speaking in tongues. The Pentecostal movement, birthed on Azusa Street in California, was unlike anything the religious world had seen. It was desegregated, interracial, and allowed women to lead. General Washington was captivated by its energy and spirit, adding many of these practices to his own evolving doctrine. But when he embraced speaking in tongues, the White Horse Army rejected him. Isolated but undeterred, by 1913, General Washington and Betty formed their own church, the House of Jacob Universal Church of God. While House of Jacob biographers state that the bishop organized the church in 1910, General Washington's personal writings contradict their official claim. Enduring great hardship, Betty was often his only follower in those early days. Bishop recalls her, saying that his calling was her calling. By 1913, the couple had moved to Champaign, Illinois, where the 13th U.S. Census listed Betty and General Washington. He was head of household and a minister. His church was small, and rejection followed him. He often preached on street corners, faced hostility, and was even institutionalized. While the exact reasons for his mental health facility treatment is unknown, we do know that he frequently referred to himself as God or Jesus during this period. He recounts that following a battery of medical evaluations, he was released with doctors praising him as like no other than 5 men on earth. Perhaps another tall tale of General Washington. The strain of poverty and constant rejection weighed heavily on his marriage, but Betty remained by his side until a fateful missionary trip to Iowa. While the details are not clear, General Washington writes that she abandoned him. Other accounts are that he and other missionaries left her in Iowa with a promise to send her funds to travel home later. What is clear is that by 1913, General Washington had entered into a passionate romantic affair with a woman from Bible study. She too married. The pair's controversial relationship appears to have caused a deep rift in the House of Jacob. Original Chicago members rebelled. The bishop was brought before the council. According to General Washington, Betty slapped him while he testified. But for 7 years, he and prophetess A.B. Israel, as she would be known, presented themselves as husband and wife, both sharing the adopted surname, Israel. Prophetess A.B. Israel became a pivotal figure in his ministry. Her leadership role so prominent, the bishop authorized his mistress to affix her signature to incorporation documents as a founder. Perhaps pushed out the limelight, his legal wife Betty watched from the sidelines as the bishop traveled with prophetess A.B. Israel, openly calling his girlfriend his wife and helpmate. Fearing that original founding members were orchestrating a plot to overtake the church, in 1917, General Washington filed for incorporation. These articles of incorporation were filed by the law firm Tigner and Peterson. Influential during the civil rights movement, Tigner was a black firm founded by Howard University Law School alumni. General Washington's anxiety grew when months passed without any word about the status of the incorporation filing. Finally, a letter arrived. The letter is believed to have been from the Washington, D.C. office of the Recorders of Deeds. This office is important to Black American history. Famed abolitionist and civil rights advocate Frederick Douglass was the first African American appointed by the White House to the Washington, D.C. office of the Recorders of Deed. From that moment onward, this government post was traditionally held by an African American. Oddly, the letter General Washington supposedly received stated that he was required by rule to submit for questioning before a panel of theologians. Following the panel's interview, General Washington changed the name of his church. Formerly, the House of Jacob, the Universal Church of God. Following the mysterious meeting came the more elevated and patriotic name, the Supreme Council of the House of Jacob of the United States of America. The new name recommendation, according to biographers, came after General Washington convinced the theological panel that his church was the oldest church ever recorded in the Bible. So enamored, the panel supposedly suggested that the House of Jacob was so profound a discovery that Bishop G.W. Israel ought to have a formal introduction to President Woodrow Wilson. The legitimacy of the supposed panel that vetted General Washington's theological claims and the government's endorsement of his beliefs remains deeply questionable. According to official records from the Washington, D.C. office of the Recorder of Deeds, no such panel ever existed under D.C. law, The incorporation process for religious organizations is neutral, meaning that the government doesn't scrutinize or endorse religious doctrines. Even more debatable is the claim that this panel recommended that Bishop G.W. Israel meet with President Woodrow Wilson. Given Wilson's well-documented racial prejudice, it seems highly improbable that the panel would suggest that such an invitation would be extended to the leader of a black religious movement. Wilson's administration was infamous for resegregating federal offices and promoting discriminatory policies, making the idea of such a meeting highly inconsistent with historical realities. Whether or not this mysterious panel of theologians actually convened to test the legitimacy of General Washington's faith remains uncertain. A mystery lost to history, or one of General Washington's elaborate tales? We shall never know. Historians suggest that his assertion of receiving an endorsement from the Washington, D.C. government could have been more than just a bold declaration, and may have stemmed from a deeper need for legitimacy. Unlike many of his peers in the Pentecostal movement, Washington had no denominational support or partnership with other clergy. This left him vulnerable to skepticism and doubt, particularly when recruiting new members. In a time when religious affiliation could make or break a ministry's success, projecting an aura of governmental approval was a powerful tool, claiming that his church had been vetted and sanctioned by a panel of theologians, followed by an invitation to the White House, lent an air of authority that was difficult to challenge. Such claims were particularly compelling for early recruits, often poor and without the means to investigate or verify his bold declarations. To them, the idea that the U.S. government had effectively named and approved their church offered a comforting sense of security and belonging. Thus, true or not, Bishop G.W. Israel's story of the theological panel served its purpose in that it bolstered Washington's authority in the eyes of his followers, cementing his claim as a prophet for generations to come. By 1920, General Washington's relationship with A.B. Israel had soured. Like Betty before her, he accused the prophetess of betrayal, calling her a whore in his writings, and claiming she had left him for another god. Heartbroken and humiliated, he returned to Philadelphia and began building the foundation for many of the church's key traditions, from its sacred songs to its governing body and the Board of Regulation. Often presented as a widower later in life, the rest of General's romantic life is shrouded in secrecy. The only glimpse is another mysterious woman named Sister M.S. Israel. Similar to the former prophetess A.B. Israel, she too adopted the bishop's surname and was granted significant church authority soon after Bishop and A.B. Israel's bitter breakup. During a 1921 Pennsylvania convocation, Sister M.S. Israel was ordained as one of only 3 counselors, tasked as his business agents and to keep the church in line. In a speech empowering her scope of authority, Bishop G.W. Israel said, "He that heareth them, heareth the bishop." The fall of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association and the failure of established black denominations to lift up urban masses left a vacuum. Filling the void were leaders like Father P.O.I., Elder Lucy Smith, Elder Michaud, and Father Divine, establishing headquarters and centers such as New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Leading in social agencies, it was common for these leaders to form communal headquarters for their members, such as farms, old folks' homes, schools, and hotels. In his final years, Bishop G.W. Israel was transfixed on a vision of self-reliance for his followers. So, like other black religious leaders of his time, he saw the Back to the Farm movement as a path to independence for members suffering from systemic poverty, discrimination, and lack of access to health care. Following his vision, he purchased farmland in Maryland, where alongside his followers they built homes, grew crops, and started a sawmill. He was on a path for his followers to escape the shackles of poverty, deep unemployment, and hunger. But his health was failing. In 1934, at the age of 56, Bishop G.W. Israel died suddenly from what doctors noted as acute indigestion. However, due to the discriminatory nature of health care at that time, it was common for doctors to misdiagnose heart failure in black men and women as acute indigestion. Thus, it was in Philadelphia Mercy Hospital that General Washington drew his final breath under the watchful eyes of his devout inner circle. The fateful day was May the 19th, 1934. Torn with grief, church officials were struck with further unsettling news. With their visionary leader gone forever, he had left no plan for succession. With General having held much of the church property in his personal name, transfer of ownership was also in question. In a scramble to secure assets, church officials attempted to misidentify Bishop G.W. Israel as widowed. Living in Philadelphia herself, General's now widow, Betty, received news of the plot. Angry at the misrepresentation, Betty took steps to officially correct General's death certificate by sworn affidavit. Still today, the certificate shows her corrections of the attempted fraud. Forced into a legal battle to reclaim the farmland, Betty eventually deeded the property to the church for an undisclosed amount. Despite the drama and turmoil following Bishop G.W. Israel's death, the house of Jacob survived. He was laid to rest in a churchyard he had not long ago dedicated in Princess and Maryland. Over the next century, the Supreme Council of the House of Jacob flourished, accumulating hundreds of acres of farmland in Maryland, Florida, and Ohio. The church operated an elementary school, nursing home, and a girls' home for unwed mothers. As early as 1987, the church has profited from the presence of several oil wells. Operated by the prominent oil and gas company Diversified Production LLC, some of the church's oil wells are still active. In January 2024, Diversified Production LLC reported producing over 7 million cubic feet MCF of gas from 34 active wells in Coshocton County. By 2024, the church had drifted from its founding principles. Modern leadership shifted its members to non-membership status, stripping them of the participation, resources, and access that had once defined the church's mission. What began as a movement rooted in independence and self-sufficiency had transformed into something else entirely.